Hello, and in this discussion, we are going to talk about a closer look on the Docker, where how can you create a container, and more about Docker images. So the main points of this discussion would be creating an image and how to create an image itself, then how to build and how to run a image into a container. So the requirement beforehand is if you have Windows in your operating system as your operating system, it's preferable to enable your WSL and install Docker. For any other operating system like Linux distros or Mac, you just have to install the Docker. And those tutorials how to install it, it's there. Like you could find it on Google. It can be easily found. So now, like for this case, let's talk about the container itself. So here we have a container that consists of an Ubuntu operating system, and it already has the latest Python installed within that container. So in order to map that a container like this, we have to build a image that contains these requirements. So for example, in order to create an image, we are using a file called Dockerfile. And in this Dockerfile, we are mentioning the type of requirements we require and the operating system we need and how to run the container itself. So the operating system, that's where we are calling it Ubuntu, right? And then as well a command to install the Pythons, and then the project specification. For example, in this case, your project itself is within a source folder, so you just copy and paste. And then in order to run it, you mention the command that the container needs to use in order to start it. So let's give an example. In this case, we are seeing a small project based on Node.js that is running on a port that is 3222, and to the endpoint of slash, we will receive an hello world. So first, before running within a container, Docker container, let's run it normally, which we will use npm start. And npm start has been used in the packages.json to mention which file to run. So here it's saying during the run, the npm start, the project port is listening on 3222. So let's check that out. All right. Okay. Localhost 3222, and as you notice, 3 hello world. So that's running a normal Node.js project. So for the case of running within a container, what do we require in this case is we have to have a Node.js installed, and we have to install the dependencies like similar to Express, a package that is called Express. So let's go to the Dockerfile and build an image for that case. First, we require to create and have an operating system. In this case, I'm going to use Alpine. You could use any other operating system. So then I require to install the Node.js within the container, because without Node.js, it might not work. You cannot run the index, the Node.js project. And another thing is we have to copy the files, like for the case of index.js and package.json, we have to copy them from their source to the destination. Later on, we have to install it in order to have the access of the Express.js in the container. Next, to run the Docker container, we specify when the Docker container is starting. The command will be started automatically, which is npm start, similar to what we have written in the command prompt. So now that's our Docker file. Now we have to build that file into an image. So before creating image, let's check Docker images to check what images you have. In this case, I have 2 images in my repository. It will show the repository name, the tag, the image ID, and when it has been created and the size of the image. So in this case, we don't have a Docker file, Docker for Node.js. The project for this case. So to build that project Dockerfile into an image, let's use this command called docker, all right, build, and then dot. Dot means within the current directory, current folder that you're in. So let's click that on, and it's Docker will run or compile the file into an image. Now it has made an image. To check that, we say docker images, and in here it has pre-generated an image ID, and it mentioned the created. For my case, I have created this long ago, but for you case it should show seconds if you created it now. To run the project, the image to a container, so we could run it similar to npm start. So what we will use before going, there's something called Docker PS that checks the containers that are running within your system. For my case, nothing is running. So let's run Docker in order to run the image that we have created, the image ID. So we say Docker run, and then we mention the ID of the image, and we run it. In that case, it's doing the similar thing as we have done previously. It's listening on port 3222. When you cancel, Control C, when you go to Control C, the Docker, the container, it's still running. For that case, it's still running with the command of npm start. So it knows that it has to start it, you say npm start. We could stop the container to run, so because you might not need it at the moment, so you say docker stop and the image ID. Yeah, so good. Okay, docker stop. You mentioned, you have to mention that's the image ID, so I have to mention the container ID or the container pre-generated name. For this case, it's just that name. So now let's check again our docker stop. No, docker PS, I mean. So let's check what parts containers are running. Nothing is running at the moment of time. So it's kind of difficult. Now we ran a Docker container, but it's difficult to remember all the images that we made. For example, the Docker images, we had to run it with a specified ID, and we might have several IDs for it. So it's preferable maybe to name your image in a you have to name your image in a unique name, so you could remember at a later date, so you don't have to create the image ID. Or when you're running it, you don't want to have a generated container name, but you want to have a specified container name, so you could run it or stop it because you understand, your container name. So for this case, let's run docker build again, the image, docker build dot, and then use an additional, which is tag. So the dash T means the tag name. So you are tagging the image with a specified name. For example, we say Node.js starter, right? Node.js init. All right. So that's the tag name for this case. So it's building a new image with that tag. So check again the Docker images, and here we have our Node.js repository name. As you notice, the the repository name, and with that specified ID. In order to run it, you could mention Docker run Node.js init without even having to put the ID, image ID. You just say run Node.js init, right? Now you run it. It's running the same way, right? So Docker PS, the Docker PS, you could check it has the image name. But for the case of during the runtime, if you didn't specify the name of the container, it will pre-generate. So in this case, let's give an ID, a unique name for the running container. So first, let's stop the container, Brave, Liskov. And let's specify a name, Docker run. So basically you say name, dash dash name. You just say node container, all right? And then you mention the image ID, which is Node.js init, right? So it's running with the specified name node container. So to verify that, let's check again the containers that is running. So here, notice we have Node.js container that you have specified the name. So let's stop that container, node container. So what we have learned so far is to compile a Docker file, you have to have first operating system, and then specify the specification for your project, and if there's any dependencies that you have installed, mention it here, and as well how to start the container. For this case is npm start. So for other cases like Java, it might be different. And as well to run or create the Dockerfile into an image, we use the Docker build tool, Docker build, and as well dot to showcase that it is within that directory, within our current directory, and a tag name for you to recognize, for us to recognize as the Node.js, the image name. And in order to run the project, the image, you mentioned Docker run, right? And then you mention, in order to give a unique name for ourself, we mentioned -- add name, and then you mention the image that you have mentioned, for example, Node.js init. That's that image name that we have specified in doing the build. So in the images, we could see all the images that we have created, and Docker ps, we could see all the containers that are running. In order to stop container running, you specify Docker stop and mention the image ID, the generated name, or the container ID for the container to stop, because you don't want to have it running continuously. So for the case of continuing on, so for the case of these things that we have mentioned them all by ourselves. But how does the Docker know which operating system to take? Because we never mentioned how to install the operating system. We never mentioned how to take it, where the operating system exists, and how would they know? Does it go from the internet and install everything into a container and run a whole operating system within the container? So let's remove Alpine and hover from, right? So what do you see here? So in the documentation, you mentioned from base image. It's mentioning a base image. So how is an operating system be a base image? In fact, Alpine is an image, or Ubuntu or anything is an image that has been configured just the way we did, similar to how we have done it in Dockerfile, like run apk and those stuff. Other people have made this Ubuntu image and named it into Ubuntu, like how we made the image name, how we specified the name of Docker image. They mentioned it into Ubuntu because they configured the image in a way it acts like an operating system. So it's an image or similar to a Dockerfile that has been built by other people in order for other people to use that image for their projects. So where does the Docker take this base image? Because we don't have it in our Docker images. In fact, it's downloading or installing from a registry, and this registry is like similar. It's called Docker Hub. For the case of Docker, it's taking the Docker Hub. So let's search on images. We could check any images in this case. So for example, Ubuntu. In fact, we will find an image that has been created, Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a Docker official image, as you notice. Or like for example, we were using Alpine as the operating system image. So we say, for example, Alpine. So this can refer to this has been configured before, and we use that image in order to run our system. So what does it mean in our case? So that means that we can make an image and reuse that image itself. For example, we could say make an image that has the Node.js installed, and then we just run the project. So let's try to make an image that has Node.js and an operating system already installed, and we will reuse that image and run only these two commands. So let's create another file, not similar to Dockerfile, but we'll call it touch.dockerfile.demo, for example. So here we created a new file. So what do we need for this case? We need a base image, of course, because we don't want to configure a whole Ubuntu, a whole operating system. So we'll take it in Alpine. And then we as well take one thing only, and that thing is taking the Node.js that is to install the Node.js in the container, in the image, so we don't have to mention it here again. So let's build that thing. So first we build it. Okay, so it's Docker build, right, within the directory, and then you have to mention, because we have now two different Docker file, and the Docker file is the default file, so we have to mention which file we want to build as an image. So we mentioned /f, which is standing for file, so we mention it is Dockerfile, right, .demo, right, and then we specify the name. So we will say the name or the tag would be t tag name, so we will mention Node.js starter. All right. Now Docker is running or building a Node.js starter. So let's check an image for that. Check. So we have a Node.js starter. Do you notice we have a Node.js starter? So we have created a Node.js starter for our own. Now what we will use in order to reuse this Docker file that we have, the image that we used, we will use the base image, right? The base image which has all the stuff we need. So what's the name of it? Node.js starter. So let's use that from Node.js starter, right? And then we copy our project and run npm install. So now let's try to build that project again, docker build dot, right, and then we mention what it is. We tag it to Node.js init, and it builds based on the Node.js starter. Now it's made the image, right? Let's check the Docker images. It has created Node.js init. As you notice, it said created 6 seconds ago, based on Node.js starter, which is an image that we have made on our own with Alpine and Node.js installed. Now let's run the container. Let's say Node.js init, right? Node.js init. I mentioned run, right? So okay, docker run Node.js init, and we don't mention the name itself, so we just say docker run Node.js init, and I think we're good to go. You notice we got the same thing, same substance, but now we have an image that we could reuse. Like for any project, now we have an image, Docker, like an image that we could use for any project. In fact, we have created our own, but you could find the other images that have been made. For example, we could see, for example, like someone configured MySQL image, so you don't have to install on those stuff. So someone made an image for that case. And as well, the way we made Node.js starter, someone has already made, the community has made it. So we could check it. In fact, people love it because they say 10 million downloads. So people use this instead of a configured Node.js. So we could say that this image name is Node, right? So what we could say, mention in this case, instead of Node.js starter from our image, we could say Node. We could use Node. And then there's an amazing part. You can mention, for this case, you want to have Node tag Alpine. For this case, we want to make it very minimal. So we say, for this case, Alpine version of the Node.js running. So we will say Docker build. So we build it again, but with Node.js Alpine taking from the outside. It built again with the Node.js Alpine from this image. Now we could run it same thing, it does the same thing. So in this case, we could create our own image, whatever we want. We could use other images, for example, MySQL and anything else. So I guess that's about it. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, hope you understand. I hope you enjoyed this video. And one small note though. So in the case that you're trying to run this same project with the same port number and project with the Node.js, there's one thing that I didn't mention, which is Docker. When you say Docker run, so let's check the images. So like when you're saying Node.js Docker run Node.js init, which was our image, when you run it, it's saying listening on port 3222, right? But actually, when you run it in here, in this case, it's not gonna run, because for the reason being is, since I use the metaphor of the containers, so it's a closed container at this current time. So we could even it's a closed container. In order to open it, you have to open a small hole, and that's the port. So let's check our containers, Docker PS. So there is a case saying ports. So this is the holes that you want to open within the container. So how do you open a container so in order for the project within the project that could listen to a small certain port? For example, in this case, we need to have 3222 to be opened for the port. So what you could do, so let's Docker stop. Node.js exciting. Okay, let's stop this container. Now let's run it. In this case, when you run it, you have to specify the port. So what you could do is /p, and then you mention 3222. This is from the outside, 3222 from the inside. So within the Docker container, it's listening to 3222, and outside, which is your PC, it's listening to 3222. So let's run it. And it's going to listen, in this case, port 3222. I didn't want to mention it beforehand because I thought it might confuse. It's just simply if your project is running on a port which is 3222, you could specify it during the runtime of the container. So I guess, yeah, that's it.